This is a recording of Carolyn's Corner. Thank you guys for watching this. We have a wonderful panel of guest hosts here today to talk about racial justice issues. And I think all of us have been just, grief-stricken over what we saw happen in Savannah with the Ahmaud Arbery shooting and murder. And but one of the things we know is that we have these kinds of issues that happen, hopefully to a less dramatic and horrific degree, but these kind of racial concerns are happening all the time in our own community. And so I wanted to use this opportunity to have a discussion with leaders in the community, faith leaders, to talk about the issues and talk about, what they see are some of the challenges that we face here in the 7th Congressional District, in Gwinnett and in Forsyth. So I'm going to start off. I'll just introduce each person, give them a few minutes to talk, and then I will ask some questions. We can ask questions of each other and just have a bit of a discussion about these issues. I am starting off with my wonderful friend, Jim Taylor, who has been very involved in education here in Gwinnett, and in particular works with a group, Be Much, which is a group of men in the faith community who are out helping children in the schools. And one of their issues has been sort of disproportionate disciplinary proceedings against Black children. And so wanted to turn it over to him to talk about the issues in the schools. And of course, we hear about the school to prison pipeline and sort of how that gets started. And if we're thinking about policy ways to address these issues, this is kind of the starting point of where we need to start thinking about dealing with racial justice. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Taylor. You are on mute right now, so don't forget to unmute yourself.
Oh,
there you go. Okay.
Oh, I'm unmuted. All right.
I've given a whole speech now, so I was completely muted.
Okay.
So I turn it over to you to just talk for a few minutes about the issues you see.
I certainly appreciate it. When you think of, certainly when I think of what happened to Ahmaud Arbery at the age of 25, and almost 8 years ago to the day, in February of 2012, we had Trayvon Martin in a similar situation, an unarmed Black man gunned down. Wrong place at the wrong time, looked suspicious. That's what George Zimmerman said about Trayvon Martin. He had a hoodie on, he just looked suspicious. The two men that saw Ahmaud Arbery said, well, he looked like he's one of the guys that was perhaps burglarizing homes. So he was unarmed and killed. I cite those two who were at the ages of 17 and 25 respectively to say that, what happened to them was a result of implicit bias. But that implicit bias didn't begin when they were adults. It begins in school. And let me give you a classic example. I don't want to sound like too much of a professor here, but last year, some professors at Yale University conducted a study, and you'll see where I'm headed with this in a moment. And they had a bunch of preschool teachers of students ages 3 and 4. And they said, now in your classrooms, there are going to be some kids who are going to be troublemakers. We want you to watch out for them. And what they discovered, as early as grades ages 3 and 4, 40% of the time, the teachers were looking at Black males. So even then, the stereotypes and the implicit bias, the expectations were that these are the ones who are going to act out. Let's fast forward to Gwinnett County Public Schools and their discipline report from last year. Black students make up 31% of the student population in Gwinnett County Public Schools last year. Yet 51% of all of the out-of-school suspensions were Black students. You would think if everything was equal, it would have been 31%, but it was 51%. You look at the white population, 22% of the students in Gwinnett County Public Schools are white. Only 12% received out-of-school suspensions. So this implicit racial bias, racial profiling, racial stereotyping begins at an early age. Okay, we can say what the problem is, but what do we do about it? Yeah. Until and unless we start holding our educators and our school board members and our superintendent, etc., accountable, it's going to continue. This disproportionality has existed for the past 20 years, but it's sort of as if it's been accepted. If their feet aren't held to the fire, it's going to continue. We're in an election year. I think it's high time for us now to hold them accountable, and we really need to look at the ballot box and see who's qualified, who is going to teach our kids with a blind eye, going to teach them all equally, the same instructional strategies, and stop racially profiling young Black men.
Yeah. So, Jim, just one quick follow-up question. Are there strategies that schools have tried to kind of raise awareness about this implicit bias in teachers, or to teach teachers, how to spot that in themselves and address those kind of issues?
4 years ago, as a matter of fact, Wendy was on that task force. They had a task force that convened that within the school system, and they had a bunch of principals and assistant principals, and they were looking at what they call culturally responsive teaching strategies. Mm-hmm. I think they looked at it for about 3 months. They looked at other school systems to see what they were doing to come up with some recommendations for the board. The night that they presented it to the board, for all intents and purposes, rejected the recommendations. They said, we don't really need that. The dominant culture in Gwinnett County Public Schools at that particular time, this was the board speaking, it's the white culture. If people are coming in and they want to get acclimated to Gwinnett County Public Schools, these are my words now, they just have to roll with the flow. So there have been some things. But here's my take on everything. Until we declare a state of emergency, nothing is going to happen. Give you an example. When the coronavirus, where we are right now, where schools were closed, teachers had to go home and students had to go home. So they had to come up with digital learning. There was an emergency. My daughter's a teacher. We have to teach teachers how to provide instruction digitally. So there was a mad scramble to get that done. This was an emergency. So because of that emergency, the district has responded, and they put in measures to address student learning via digital learning, digital instruction. In the same way, until and unless they create an emergency or declare an emergency as it relates to the disproportionate treatment of children of color, nothing is going to happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Wes Person also is joining us. He is a friend, somebody I'm supporting for the district attorney race here in Gwinnett, somebody who is an attorney, been a defense attorney, has been on various sides dealing with the legal issues with respect to criminal justice in Gwinnett for a long time. And I was hoping you could talk some to, criminal justice issues, criminal justice reform, and racial disparity, and racism as we see it within the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Taylor was right on with the bias in terms of how it kind of permeates our whole society in a way. One of the things we see in criminal justice is African-American and Hispanic population, they don't make up a majority of the population. Here in Gwinnett, probably make up 30, 40%, but yet they make up 50 to 55% of those incarcerated or those in the criminal justice system. If we look at our jail population throughout the state, is about between 55 and 60% people of color. So it's a clear bias that is going on in terms of how they're treated, how they're punished, and how they're viewed. One of the things that I want to do as the district attorney is to have all my prosecutors and all my investigators go through implicit bias training, because most people don't realize they're biased. Most people sort of think that they're okay, that they're race neutral. They don't realize that. I mean, most people, unless they see it, like, I walk into an elevator and I see a white woman clutching her purse. she's probably one of the most progressive people in the world, probably belongs to a number of progressive organizations. But she's in an elevator with a Black male, and she has that fear. And me, myself, and I'm not sure if Dr. Taylor and Dr. Baker do the same thing, but I sort of alter my behavior because I know that bias is out there.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm in a parking lot and there's women in the parking lot, I will stop and wait for them to get to their car before I make a move, because I don't want them to think that I'm going to come behind them and do anything. When I walk into an elevator and there are people there, I will smile just so that they won't feel as threatened. And just certain things, the way I dress a certain way. I've always dressed that way because my father would not let me dress in some of the newer fashions because he did not want me to be stereotyped. He did not want me to be classified. So he made sure I dressed in I would like to say, a preppy way, even though we were far from preppy. We were poor. But he wanted to make sure that people looked at me and they didn't see a threat. So, and I'm old. I'm 55 years old, and this has, been a part of my life since I can remember. So we really have to, as Dr. Taylor said, we really have to start educating America on just the bias that they have, that they don't even realize that they have.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I'm picking a jury, I will try to define bias from them because, when people think of it, they think like, oh, I'm not a racist. And then I try to use, a story with me. I'm a big University of Michigan fan, and anything that's Ohio State, I can't get with. Just like, nah, I can't get with it. So that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. That just means I love the University of Michigan. So once they kind of understand bias, and they understand it doesn't mean that you have a malignant heart or you have hatred in your heart, but it's just you've been conditioned for a certain reason to look at something a certain way and you don't even realize it. Once they understand that, then they're open to, have those things challenged and changed.
No, those are important observations. And I would just say, the number one thing I hear from, people in the Black community, I talk about schools, I talk about anything, right? It is just that the racism colors every aspect of their lives, from employment to schooling, everything. And, and I think this is actually a very important, discussion for everybody to watch in the district, because
Yeah.
I think this is important for people to hear this.
Okay.
Okay.
It even dictates what type of car you may buy. And I'll let somebody else on that, but it really does. I mean, it's sad but true.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Wes. I am also honored to have two faith leaders from the community, Pastor Marion Saylor from Christ the King and Pastor Gregory Baker from Freedom Church. I'm going to start by handing it off to Pastor Saylor. And just, what do you see in the community? And, as a faith leader, how do we deal with these issues? How do we heal? How do we come together?
And I see it from two lenses. I'm a faith leader, but I'm also the mother of a 22-year-old Black male. And I can tell you, just last night, with him leaving the house, I have a concern. Every time he leaves the house and it's dark, I have a concern. And so I have that lens, I have that emotional feelings that come up knowing when he leaves the house what he is going out to deal with. And I'm just not quite sure he understands the extent of the possibilities of what can happen, but I'm very conscious of it. I'm conscious of the fact that this isn't new. This is systemic. This has been around hundreds of years. And to piggyback on what Dr. Taylor and Wes were saying, Wes, in terms of educating people, I just think that there just has to be some truth telling. This has been a problem. The United States of America has a racism problem. And this problem, we have to admit from the highest level up all the way down that race is an issue. And until
Oh, wait, you muted yourself. Can you go unmute yourself? Whoops. Sorry, you're still muted. Hold on.
Yeah, wait, I got it.
Okay.
But until we as a someone muted me.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good.
Okay. Until someone, you know, I'm muted. I'm not touching anything.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
I can hear you. You're coming through. Yeah.
Until we really admit as a country, we have a problem. We have a racism problem. I think it has to start there. There has to be reconciliation. I mean, we see it as faith leaders in the church, at least in my church, that, you know, Sunday is still one of the most segregated times of you know, the week, Sunday morning during church time. But I just think until we seriously admit we live in a racist country, we'll be talking about this for a couple more 100 years.
That's a daunting prospect. We have got to, yeah. I want to put in a good plug because I love going to Pastor Saylor's church and Pastor Baker's church. So if people want to come, it's so warm and so wonderful. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. And Pastor Baker, just wanted to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Carolyn. I want to just, first of all, thank you for opening this forum for us to discuss these issues. To echo what has already been shared by the panel, it's disturbing on various levels. I really, prior to the Ahmaud Arbery scenario, when my son would go outside as a football player, as an athlete, as he would go outside to run drills or to jog up the road or do whatever he was doing, I had no concerns. I had zero or little concerns. My wife would share, you know, well, maybe you should stick your head out there and make sure he's doing okay, or just kind of look down the road. After this, the height of that experience has changed everything. And it goes to the point that Pastor Saylor was sharing as it relates to the concern in the African American community. There's a traumatic DNA strand within the African American culture as it relates to slavery. And we have to remember that there's an emotional tie to that pain that has been experienced generationally, that we can't deny it. We have to address it. As Pastor Saylor also shared, as others also shared on the panel, this is something that requires truth telling. And without truth telling, we can't have restorative justice. We can't have true reconciliation is going to require truth telling that pulls victim and victor to the table, majority and minority to the table, so that we can talk this through and have an honest discussion with an honest desire to try to pull everyone forward. And you cannot deny what is the reality. This is something that we've got to just kind of admit exists and admit that the wound is there. Doesn't matter who put it there. Doesn't matter who started it. It matters how we heal together. And you cannot heal with a lie. You have to heal with the truth. And that's where the truth telling has to come in order to do this. There's a lot of things that got to happen to move forward. This is a major step, Carolyn. I believe that if you as Congresswoman could continue once in office, if you can continue and rally others that do not look like us, to come to the table and suggest how these systemic oppressive things that are in place can shift and need to shift, I think we can start the ball moving forward. There's a lot that needs to happen, but there's a lot that can't happen.
I agree. And, you know, if I can be in a position to do that, I would just be honored. I think it would be really important. My aunt worked on that. She's in Greensboro, North Carolina, and did the Remembrance Project. Where you bring it's tied to the museum in Birmingham where they had the lynching, and they bring back the monument and place it in the community. And I know there are people in Gwinnett who are working on that as well. And it's a one of many forums for having a real dialogue about what's happened in a community, what's happened in the past, and trying to do some reconciliation around that.
EJI, Carolyn, the Equal Justice Institute.
Yes.
Brian Stevenson. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely something. I don't want to politicize it, I do, but it's something that, I think would be, is very important for this community. And of course, the 7th District has Forsyth, which has, just a horrifying history of, the basically a racial cleansing that happened in that county. And, but Gwinett is not alone. Forsyth is not alone. Gwinnett had its own, horror stories as well. So on that, Wes, yeah, sure, go ahead.
I just got a question for the faith leaders. Can you guys talk about, because we talk about, racism being America's first sin, and both of y'all, understand sin and repentance. Can you talk about how that process of when we finally do deal with this, truly repent, what kind of, healing that can bring on both sides?
You want to start, Dr. Baker?
Yep, you're muted, so can you unmute? There you go.
I'm sorry, you go first, Pastor Saylor.
Okay. So after we get to the point where we can be truthful about what the nation, all of us are in this together, and then we have repentance, I think that, like you spoke of earlier, there has to be that respect for our differences, the diversity, but I think it definitely has to come with a sharing, a fellowship, not just educating one another, which is important, but there really has to be a sincere, on both sides, not just one side, on both sides, and a sincere desire to come together and not be so separated, but come together and let's fellowship with one another. Let's get to know one another. Let's talk about walking in each other's shoes, and have dialogue, I just connection and fellowship, I think, are so important.
Yeah.
And I would agree. Luke 4:18 says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because He has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of the sight of the blind, to let the oppressed go free." And basically, that just kind of stimulates everything that Pastor Saylor was just sharing. It's going to require that truth telling, that prophetic voice in relationship that includes that community that looks like a community. Because if you don't see me, if you're not having coffee with me, I'm not real to you. So that means that white pastors have to sit with black pastors, white mothers have to sit with black mothers, white fathers have to sit with black fathers, and not just for a moment, but for an eternity. We've got to come to the table respectfully and hold one another accountable through this process of healing. Restorative justice is not going to happen, and I'm learning. It's not going to happen in one conversation, because if any of us be honest, you got to take that face off first, and now be real with one another and be truthful and honest and build a relationship so that we can kind of posture ourselves to move forward. The healing process, which we have really yet to begun holistically. Exactly. It's going to take some time. Generations. I'll
generational.
Then I'll be quiet.
Right.
Yeah. There was a riot my 9th grade year of high school in the rural area of Florida. There was a riot that broke out, a race riot on my school campus. I had gone to elementary school and middle school with white kids, black kids, but primarily there was some white kids that I considered my best friends. I mean, we were tight. We were real cool. We got to high school. This riot happened, and there was a division. There was a strict division that really pulled on those relationships. And the only way we were able to make it through that riot and to remain in some type of a friendship was because we were able to be honest enough with one another to share the hurts that came through that tension of that riot. And until you can be able to say to your friend who's on the other side, hitting someone else that looks like you, that hurt me too, then we can't have a real conversation, because we have to be able to see one another, and that requires community, not proximity.
Right.
Yeah, Jim. Yeah. Don't forget to unmute. Yep. Good. Yeah.
I tell you, I literally have goosebumps because I see the recurring theme, and I'm excited by it because we're all on the same page. I'm going to even take it from an educational perspective. You can go to any educator in Gwinnett County Public Schools at their central office who's been trained, and they will tell you that there's a book that they use to train their leaders. It's called Going from Good to Great by Jim Collins. And one of the first things Jim Collins says in his book, that you cannot make that transition from good to great until you do one thing first and foremost. You have to deal with the brutal facts. You have to identify what are those brutal facts. If you're in denial, you're not going to move. It's the same thing with this country. It's the same thing with the community. Until and unless we get into these fierce conversations and discuss these brutal facts and move out of denial, then and only then will the healing process begin.
Right.
Go ahead, Wes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to kind of broaden our discussion a little bit, and also, what we've seen, with the Avery case, that issue of racism. We also see, with our Asian American brothers and sisters, with this whole defining, this COVID-19 as being the Chinese virus or the Asian flu or things like that, which is causing upticks in racial incidences among the Asian community, and they're being fearful. We need to be sensitive to that as African Americans, because we know how quickly people can be scapegoated for things, and reach out and put our arms around them and, console them and let them know that we stand with them. Because Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we know how it feels. I mean, since 1619, we've been in that pot. And it's no fun to have company, but they're there, and we want to let them know, hey, we understand, and we're going to help you, as you help us, and be very sensitive. So one of the things that I've done and have spoke out on very forcefully is these issues where I see, people say things that are ignorant as it relates to this virus and its origin and anything of that nature. So we need to be vigilant on the racism that we face. We also need to be vigilant of racism that's faced by others that may not look like us, but share that experience.
Right. Agree. Well, in being in Gwinnett, we have, immigrant communities. We have a huge Hispanic community. And I have never seen, persecution of, immigrants in the way, Muslim community. But on the other hand, we're in a place too where we could really have, we are the future, and we can, I think we can have that dialogue here across so many different communities, and we will be made so much stronger by doing that, and by, trying to tackle these issues head on and honestly. Any other thoughts about, and then we'll probably have to wrap up, but, any other thoughts about, and I'm a very operational person, right? I'm somebody, I'm like, okay, what do I do next? What would be, would it be having a forum? Would it be having a series of forums around Gwinnett? What would be ways to operationalize this? I like the idea of having coffee with people. I drink a lot of coffee, and what could we do? That would be a next step, and I may have to get through the election here, but what would be a next step, that we could do as a community?
If I could just chime in, one thing that I would like to see happen, I'd ask Brother Person if he could share insight on how do we, as a congregation, as a faith community, how do we educate ourselves on the social justice issues legally in an effort to try to dispel these disparities. One of the things that we're trying to do, I'm already a part of Be Much, I'm already a part of those initiatives that I believe are very powerful in Gwinnett County. But I'd also like to know, as a faith community, what we're trying to do now is build a social justice component of ministry that focuses on these types of things. How would we become equipped to understand the legal aspects of those things to be effective? I think that we have to, someone said, we do have to educate ourselves, and then we also have to build those multiple forums for us to continue dialogue.
Well, I think one of the things that I want to do as elected is to bring y'all into the problem solving part. I mean, we have prosecutors that tell you what the problems are all day. They tell you how the crime statistics are. They tell you about this, and they get you into a point where you're fearful. What I want to do is come in and say, how can you help me rehabilitate these people? What you can do to help turn these lives around? We got these young men, we got these young men and women that have certain issues that need to be addressed. How can you at your church and at Christ the King come in partnership with the prosecutor's office to be able to provide programs for these young men and women, provide mentorship, to provide discipleship? Because we know that, it's not easy for people to turn their lives around. I know y'all been given some of the same sermons every year. And you eventually get somebody that heard it 15 times and they go, you know what, Pastor? I heard you. I'm going to change. So we have to be about discipleship. And that's one of the things I want to do is bring in faith leaders to help me solve the problem. How do we get these young men and women that are in the criminal justice system, number one, out? But then how do we keep young men and women out of the criminal justice system? What kind of preventative programs can we do? One of the things I would like to do is I call it a police athletic league, because we know we got young men and women that can't participate in athletics or in extracurricular because their families don't have the income or resources. Well, if you have a district attorney and a sheriff coming to business leaders and say, look, we need funding for this. We need funding to be able to create programs for these young men and women so they're not idle and they're staying busy and they're getting good guidance. Help us do that. And we come to the churches and help sponsor this and help create these activities. Then we could have programs that have these kids engaged, have them doing things, have them building up, their self-esteem, building up the way they see themselves, and then they won't get involved in these things. So that's what I want to do. Come to y'all and say, let's problem solve. We know what the problems are. We talk about the problems ad nauseum. How do we fix it?
Yeah, I agree. So on that note of solution, being partners in solving the problems, right? And so, after elected, that's not the end of this. The campaign is not the end of this. That's just the beginning of the dialogue. So on that note, I know some people have got to run, have got other meetings. I thank you all so much for coming. This has probably been the most important dialogue I've had of the entire campaign. So I've really, really appreciated you all being here and sharing.